Good evening. I'm Susan Hoffman, and on behalf of Sierra Nevada Forums, League of Women Voters of Northern Nevada, and AAUW Capital Branch, welcome and thank you for coming. How'd we all do on the citizenship test? All right, humbled. Before we get started, I have some announcements and acknowledgments. Thank you to our media sponsors, the Nevada Appeal and KUNR Public Radio. Thank you and happy 50th anniversary to the Brewery Arts Center. 50 years. That's how you can remember their phone number, because they started in 1976. So it's 882-1976. We appreciate being able to use this venue for our forums. Tonight we have additional thanks to the Wild Horse Children's Theater Program, who should be in here practicing their next production, Madagascar. But they kindly changed locations so that we could use the performance hall tonight. We are accepting donations for this excellent children's theater program. There's a jar on the table on the way out, if you're so inclined. I'd also like to give a shout out to Kai, our tech guru for these events. We absolutely could not do this without him. Many thanks to Jeff Mulvihill with InstaImage, who records our forums. These videos are available on our website a day or two after the forum, so you can go back and check your notes and, did I really hear what I thought I heard? Fun to rewatch. Next month, we're hosting a showing of the documentary, The Librarians. It's on a different date, April 22nd, and in a different location. It will be in the Brewery Arts Center Ballroom, which is in the original building on the corner of King and Division. There will be limited seating for that event, so an RSVP will be required, which you can do on our website at sierranevadaforums.com. In May, we will be welcoming back Secretary of State Cisco Aguilar and Carson City Clerk Recorder Scott Hohen to review new laws and practices regarding voting and elections. If this is your first forum, you should know that all audience questions must be submitted in writing. We have Sydney Crumbly over there, a senior in high school who's headed off to UNR in the fall. And much less exciting, I'll be on this side collecting cards. So if you need a card, raise your hand. If you have a card, raise the card. We'll pick them up. We bring them to the table down here, and these fine women sort through them to make sure that we get rid of duplicates and that the questions flow along with our speakers. So I think that covers it all. So we are going to begin with a very special presentation.
I did realize when I was very young that I was undocumented. I was about 7 years old when I saw some folks get picked up by ICE. Me and my mom were walking home and we stopped by a 7-Eleven down the street from our house when we saw some agents grab some folks as they were walking out of the 7-Eleven. All I remember is their big gulp just kind of crashing on the floor and then just making a spill. My mom froze. She was holding on to my hand really, really tight. And in that moment, I realized that something was wrong. My middle name is Jasmine, and I am originally from Mexico City, but I was raised here in Las Vegas.
Mi nombre es Juan y soy originario de la Ciudad de México.
My name is Paola Luke. I'm originally from Argentina, but now I live here in Carson City.
So my name is Ruben De Silva, and I'm from India. I was actually born in Mumbai. Back then it was Bombay.
My name is Margarita Romano, and I'm from Mexico. I was originally born in Mexico City, but I was raised in Tijuana.
My name is Aaron. I'm originally born and raised from the Philippines.
My name is Therese, and we are from the same town in General Trias, Cavite, Philippines.
I saw my dad struggling almost his whole life. Actually, what brought me here was wanting to help my family. I said, I have to do something different. I started with work and travel programs. You know, they give you a visa for 3 months and you go back to your country and so on, so on. And one of the trips I met, who's now my ex-husband, but at the time, my husband. And we got married and, you know, you start the process and here I am 25 years later.
My grandpas and my uncles, they're all with the U.S. Navy. So that's how our family immigrated to the U.S. was through the Navy and then family petitions. At that time, it was my grandma who petitioned my mom, and then I was under 21. That's why I was able to come. And that's what brought me to the U.S. And then when he came, he said he had an opportunity to stay with that commercial cleaning business. And then later on, we got married, and then he joined the army, and that's what brought us to Reno from California.
¿Cómo están? Muy buenos días, bienvenidos. Hoy, viernes 27 de febrero. Nunca pensé que el amor me hiciera mudarme de México a Reno. Nunca lo pensé. Pero pues la vida, Dios me puso a esta mujer, mi esposa que se llama Julieta, y me hizo llegar aquí a Reno. Creo que ha sido de las mejores decisiones que he tomado en mi vida. No me arrepiento de nada y no, nunca me lo imaginé, pero estoy feliz de eso.
So I came to the United States in 1987. I was 2 years old. And, you know, I know my family saw the United States as being that great beacon of freedom, literal freedom, you know, for us, you know, where we were no longer subjects. But my parents, my mom and dad were both born in Goa, could now become actual free and independent people. And it was because of America that this was possible.
In Mexico, I am a licensed psychologist. So I was about 24 years old, and I was married. I had a daughter. My husband, he got an invitation to help in a project for work. I also said, okay, if I'm gonna go, I want to be able to practice. I found an amazing agency called BDS, and they were actually hiring. I validated my studies, my educational background, and see if there was any opportunities to get a work visa, which they were. They granted me a TN visa. I started doing like entry level mental health support.
I'm an American who was, not even a citizen when I was serving this country in Iraq. I was a green card holder. But I believe in this nation, and I want to see this country succeed. I identify more as an American, than I do even as an Indian person. And I love this country deeply to a point where I was willing to give my life for this nation. I volunteered to serve in the Marine Corps because I felt that after 9/11, our country was under attack. The nation needed young people to step up, and I answered the call.
there were two very important things for me that as a resident I didn't have. One was voting, and the other one was being part of a jury. I think those two things are just the epitome of a cycle, I guess, of you are living in a community, and I think it's important that you can judge people for what they do, what they don't. So that's the part of the jury duty. But the most important, I think, it was the voting. Every single one for the last 10 years, everyone that it was the primaries, midterm, even for mayor or whatever it is in there, if it's going to affect me, I'm going to vote.
As an immigrant, I came to this country that I love, and now I'm an American citizen and it's my country to serve. I came to help. I came to provide a service. And being able, and I became emotional because I saw the need, even more than in Mexico. Like the lack of mental health providers in other languages is significantly high. We don't have enough support. I actually right now belong to Beast Year, Nevada. I'm a board member of an organization that is trying to do a workforce pipeline to start having more mental health providers since high school with entry-level positions, because there's not enough mental health providers in America.
We consider our place, the Malaya, an extension of the farmers market because we support different vendors and different vendors supports us too, so we can offer better options for our clientele and the community. So we have so-called bayanihan in the Philippines. So it's called like helping each other out.
We were pointed this direction mainly because of the families that have already, paved the way for us. That's why we are here. And so your question of like, is this really the dream? Feel like we are living the dream. What else can you ask for? You have a comfortable life and you have this opportunity to have your own business.
Me encantaría que la gente supiera que las personas que migramos de otro país a los Estados Unidos somos personas que venimos a trabajar, que venimos a poner nuestro granito de arena aquí a los Estados Unidos para hacer ese país lo que es un gran país. Tenemos muchos ejemplos de personas que han venido aquí a Estados Unidos, han hecho su familia, han creado su propia empresa y esa empresa crea empleos que impactan directamente en la economía regional, y que los migrantes no todos somos ni criminales, ni violadores, ni venimos aquí a hacer cosas malas. Somos migrantes que venimos aquí a Estados Unidos a aportar un poquito de lo que sabemos, de lo que aprendimos en otros lugares, aplicarlo aquí en los Estados Unidos y bueno, pues ayudar a nuestra comunidad a seguir creciendo y también a nuestras familias que dejamos en nuestros países de origen.
I'm very close to being 40, and all my life I've been undocumented. DACA did change my life, but that's still not a permanent solution. I've been working for a little bit over almost 2 decades at this point, and I contribute to our tax system every year. And I know that as I get older, I'm not going to have any kind of social safety net. I feel like I'm constantly advocating for a country, for a state, for a community where we can live our full selves, where we are welcome, regardless of our immigration status and our socioeconomic statuses. And I continue to do that in a country that constantly rejects me, that actually doesn't even want me here. And that's very difficult and heartbreaking a lot of the times. I might have not been born here, but Nevada is my home. I do believe that I am a Nevadan.
On behalf of all of us at the Sierra Nevada Forums, we extend a very special thank you to Lucia Starbuck, Autumn Novotny, and the team at KUNR for producing such a poignant video. We have an excellent panel of experts to help us navigate through the many facets and complexities of immigration. Joining us tonight are Michael Kagan, the director of the UNLV Immigration Clinic at the William S. Boyd School of Law, Athar Haseebullah, the Executive Director of ACLU Nevada, Edelweiss Solano, Senior Director of the Asian Community Development Council, and Cristian Gonzalez Perez, the Supervising Attorney of Make the Road Nevada. Tonight's moderator is an award-winning political reporter for KUNR Public Radio and the host of Purple Politics Nevada. Please join me in welcoming Lucia Starbuck.
Thank you so much for having me, and a huge thank you also to the sources who agreed to, put their name and their story out there in a really heightened time. We feel very we love working with Sierra Nevada Forums, just feel very connected in the importance of bringing people together for free public forums to talk about important issues. Immigration is a huge topic in the news as well, and it's something that KUNR is following very closely. Super excited, we'll have some presentations and then get into some questions. If you support the work we're doing, we are in our spring fund drive, just putting that out there. But first, we'll start with Michael Kagan, who will kick it off with his presentation.
Be invited to be here. It's great to be in Carson City when the legislature is not here. And I'm really glad to see so many people came out to hear about this topic. Obviously, it is in the news. It is in people's lives. It's incredibly urgent. And I want to say, I'm moved by the video. I hadn't seen it before. And this is an issue that never goes away for this country. It is our welcoming of immigrants, in my opinion, is part of what's made us such a strong and successful country. But we have always struggled with a negative reaction to immigrants and xenophobia. My family came before 1925, and everything negative that is said about immigrants today was said about them at the time. And something I learned late in my grandparents' lives, did a family history interview with them and learned something my mom didn't know, which was that a number of my grandmother's cousins were deported in the 1920s. And I often like to think that the work I do today and the people I meet in Las Vegas bring me closer to my great-grandparents. And I wasn't there for my grandma's cousins in the 1920s, but I hope I can be there for someone else's cousin today. And so with that in mind, what I'm going to try to do, it's a bit daunting. Normally you have to pay tuition and enroll in a whole semester-long class if you want to learn immigration law, and then by the end of that you'll still be more confused than you know, because it's really not our most logical area of law. Actually, it's incredibly illogical and arbitrary, and that's part of what causes so many problems. I'm going to try to give just a little overview as best I can about immigrants, particularly leaning towards undocumented immigrants in Nevada specifically, and try to give you at least very broad ideas about why they're here, why people remain undocumented, and some of what's going on with immigration enforcement and mass deportation and mass detention recently. And we'll see how close I come to 25 minutes on that. So let's go to the next slide. All right. So we are in, as the figure given, 1 in 5 Nevadans is roughly the number of foreign-born people in our state, and but it's important to actually know we are an immigrant state. Oh, sure. That will help. Yeah, thank you. So we're an immigrant state, but we also have a very large undocumented population. So basically, in Nevada, about 1 in 20 people in the state is undocumented. That may be the most of any state in the country per capita. I often use this talking point because people will always go to California or Texas or New York, which obviously have many more people, but per capita, Nevada might be on top. And as cities go, Las Vegas is either number 1 or number 2 in per capita undocumented population. 1 in 10 workers in Nevada, so an undocumented person is actually more likely than an average Nevadan to be a worker. And that actually is not because they're taking someone's job. It has more to do with their age demographics. So they're more likely to be of working age, although for reasons I'll get to, that's actually starting to change. And then 1 in 4 immigrants and workers in Nevada is an immigrant, meaning they were born in another country. Next slide. Okay. I think one thing I often emphasize that about the way people talk, often the way about politicians talk, is that there is not, in my opinion, an immigrant community in Las Vegas or Reno or Nevada. There is not an undocumented immigrant community. There's just Nevada. And that is really important to understand when we think about immigration policy. We are talking about people who are fully integrated into all of our lives and do not live separately. And that ranges from people we meet every day, in my case, students and their parents who I meet, to someone who might serve me coffee. I don't do anything without coffee. I'm pretty sure I'd get no coffee without immigrants in Las Vegas, but and also just literally in terms of people's homes and households. So first of all, of the undocumented population in this state, 7 in 10 have lived here more than 10 years. And this is from Migration Policy Institute, and I think it's about 5 years old on the source. So I've kept it as it was printed, but you should probably read that as 7 in 10 have been here more than 15 years. And a very large percentage have been here for more than 20 years. I moved to Las Vegas in 2011, and I can still say most undocumented immigrants who are my neighbors in Las Vegas have lived in Las Vegas longer than me. So it is weird to call them an immigrant. 10,000 US citizens in Nevada have an undocumented spouse. In a couple slides in the future, I'll explain a question some of you might have in your mind: why doesn't their spouse get status? And I'll try to explain that. 1 in 7 K through 12 students has an undocumented person at home, usually a parent. And I can see this with my own students at UNLV too. Because we are a mixed state with mixed households. A typical Nevada household is a mixed status household, meaning under one roof you have undocumented people, citizens, maybe someone with DACA, all together in one home. That is not exceptional, that's a normal family. Taxes, this was mentioned, I think the figure that was given was probably a national figure. Nevada state and local taxes, the annual figure is $500 million. I was trying to do some comparison. I'm not great with numbers. I'm a law professor. If I was good with numbers, I'd be a doctor. But I believe that the amount of taxes undocumented immigrants pay in this state is larger than what we get in the live entertainment tax. So just keep this in mind. Ask any legislatures, if you do see them walking around here, if they have a good way of coming up with $500 million if there was that hole left in the state budget. Okay, next slide. Okay. I bring this up with great hesitation, but again, this is something that was said about Polish Jews in the 1920s when my family was immigrating. It's said about Salvadoran immigrants today. Depending on the ethnicity, the stereotype varies. Whether if it's Muslims, then it'll be cast in terms of national security and terrorism. If it's Mexicans and Salvadorans, they'll be portrayed as crime. It's always been untrue. And we know it is untrue because we actually have hard data on this. If you are walking in a dark alley and someone is following you, I don't really recommend demanding to check papers, but if you do, you should be relieved if the person following you is an immigrant because they're a lot less likely to commit a violent crime. And we can see this. This is incarceration rates. You can see the most dangerous people in America statistically are people like me who were born here. And this is from the Cato Institute. They still use the term illegal immigrants. Cato Institute's a very interesting institution, especially when it comes to, but on crime and immigration, they do by far the best work. Actually, they do fantastic research on this. But so you can see this is the likelihood of being incarcerated far higher for native-born citizens than for any group of immigrants you could find. Next slide. Actually, if I could say one other thing about immigrants and crime, I want to say something that's really important to understand. Among undocumented immigrants, there are 10 to 15 million people in the United States. Even among those 10 to 15 million people, a couple of them will commit heinous crimes. Many, many more will be arrested for DUI and everything in between. So it is very possible, it's quite easy to cherry pick from a group and say, look at this undocumented immigrant who committed a heinous crime. But I'm going to borrow this from someone from another university, so don't report me for plagiarism. That to target immigrants or undocumented immigrants as a crime prevention matter is like trying to cut down on traffic fatalities by banning Subarus. There are a number of Subarus on the road. Some of them will be involved in terrible fatal accidents. But absent something I don't know about Subarus, to target Subarus as a means of solving traffic fatalities is ridiculous, because there is no reason to think that it's the Subaru brand that's causing the problem. So very similar with undocumented immigrants and crime. Immigrants and taxes, this is a common confusion, although the point is immigrants pay taxes. In Nevada, we don't have a state income tax, so people pay the sales and property tax and any other taxes that we have. My personal opinion may be unpopular. We should have more taxes. But whatever we pay, an immigrant pays the same. And for income tax as well, immigrants pay, undocumented immigrants pay. Some immigrants pay their undocumented immigrants pay through ITIN number. That's what we advise as lawyers. I've told a lot of people to get that number. That is so the IRS can tax them. And some immigrants actually pay taxes with fake Social Security numbers. That's counterintuitive, but fake Social Security numbers are basically like giving a gift to Uncle Sam. Would you like free money on an anonymous number? That's really what a fake number does. All right, so why don't we go on? Okay, why are there so many immigrants here? First of all, it's not a bad thing. You want to be a place that immigrants want to come to. If you're living in a place that no immigrants want to come to, get out. That means your economy is crashing. It means your food is terrible. And it means that no one wants to move where you live. That's a bad thing. So in Las Vegas, the reason and in Nevada, the reason actually that we have such a large immigrant population has to do with when Nevada boomed. There was a mass migration, particularly from Mexico, in the 1990s and first decade of this century. And that is also when the population of Las Vegas boomed. So and of many cities across the Southwest. So it's not a surprise that when I said Las Vegas is number 1 or number 2 in per capita undocumented population, our competitor for that would be Houston, another city that basically boomed at the exact same time. So people coming looking for jobs, basically, I've interviewed undocumented Mexicans who came to Las Vegas in the late 90s and early 2000s, and they describe a situation where it was very, very easy to get jobs in construction, hospitality, the service industry. There was just a huge hunger for workers, and that's why they came. But many of those people remain undocumented today. Now, if you do the math, someone who came at, say, age 22, which, in 2001, which would have been very typical, that person now has a kid who might be my student in law school. And that person also, though, is getting older, and that is a concern, right? That people who are outside the social safety net largely are getting older, where they might not be able to work and are likely to have more health problems. We do have visa overstays. That is about, nationally speaking, 40 to 45% of undocumented immigrants actually entered the country legally and then overstayed a visa. I don't have that figure for Nevada. I haven't been able to see that. Next slide. Okay, I want to give just a couple little just hints, not a full explanation, but why it is people don't get status, aren't here legally, why they can't get papers after being here illegally. And this is a very familiar chart to immigration lawyers. This is the visa bulletin for different family-based categories. I'm not going to go through what the categories are necessarily right now. Like I said, you got to pay tuition for that. But what I want you to look at is the dates in the charts, okay? Those dates are the date when you would have needed to apply to be getting a visa in March 2026. This is the most current, I got this yesterday. So yeah, exactly. So what you see here is that while one of them is, you could have applied just last month, most of them are way in the past. And you should also notice that for 4 countries, we make the people wait even longer. Mexican's the longest of all for family immigration. So you can see that there are categories of Mexicans who would have had to apply in April 2001 to get a visa this month, right now. This is for family-based immigration. Next slide. Spouses of US citizens don't have to worry about that chart, but they do have to worry about other things, and this is something that's commonly confused. So remember I said 10,000 Nevadans, US citizens, are married to an undocumented immigrant. Why don't they just sponsor their spouse? Big reasons why is that if for an undocumented immigrant who entered without inspection, they can marry a US citizen, they can win a Nobel Prize in chemistry, they can raise 4 children, they can be the deacon of their church, they can coach Little League and soccer, which as a parent is insane. But they can do all those things, they will just remain an undocumented immigrant. There is nothing anyone really can do about that if they love their family, because they cannot adjust status in the United States if they entered without inspection, and they can't go abroad back to their country to get a visa through what we call consular processing, because they would be subject to a 10-year bar. They would have to be separated from their family for 10 years. If you don't love your family, I have something to offer you. If you love your family, this is less appealing in my experience talking to clients. And here's the other thing about the entry without inspection. It doesn't matter if you were a child when you entered. So if you entered as a 2-year-old, let's say that 22-year-old who came in 2001 brought with a child, that child also entered without inspection. If that child grows up and marries a US citizen, which is very likely because that's who they're hanging out with, can't adjust status, will remain undocumented. Next slide. Okay, here's what's going on, some headlines about mass deportation in our state. We have fortunately not had what Minneapolis has suffered, and we don't want that. But we have had a massive ramp up in ICE operations here. ICE arrests are up about quadrupled at least. Actually, we don't have great current data on arrests. It's very hard to get that. We do know that in 2025, the people ICE arrests are really of one race. If you are not Latino, don't worry about it. It won't affect you, unless you like other people. But it is basically, this is a very racialized enforcement. There's just no way around it. 94% Latino. That's who was arrested by ICE in Nevada. Detention grew just from July to November. The number of people detained in Nevada at our 3 ICE detention centers, including the Washoe County Jail, was up 35%. On any given day among the 3 detention centers, Washoe County, Nevada Southern Detention Center, and Pahrump, which is the largest by far, and the Henderson Detention Center, about 600 people are detained every day. That translates to more than 5,000 people will be detained by ICE in Nevada every year, because the people spend an average length of stay at the Washoe County Jail, for example, in ICE detention is about 25 days. So if you do the math, 50 people detained per day works out to about 750 per year. About half of those arrested by ICE and detained by ICE in Nevada have no criminal convictions. And those who do have criminal convictions usually have the most minor type of criminal convictions. In our office, DUI is by far, the first-time DUI is the most likely thing that we see people with. Next slide. What has happened because of the close cooperation between our police departments and ICE also is that basically, again, only for one race, only for Latinos who are singled out by ICE for any reason, there is a different system of justice than for the rest of us. If I am arrested for DUI, I will go through don't worry, I'm taking Ubers while I'm here, so it's probably, hopefully won't happen. But if I'm arrested, I will go through the regular criminal justice system. I might spend a night in jail. I'll go get an attorney. I'll go to court. I might get a plea bargain, etc. If I were a Latino immigrant, the only part of that would be the same as the first arrest. I would probably never have an adjudication of the DUI charge. That is what we are seeing in our cases. They are handed over, people are handed over to ICE, and people are deported before their criminal cases are even resolved. And so basically, guilt and innocence don't matter for Latino immigrants anymore in Nevada. All that matters is just that initial arrest. That's wrong. We can stop that, by the way, by saying we want one system of criminal justice in this state. You know how on our Statue of Liberty, she's blindfolded? That's what that blindfold's about. Okay, next slide. Oh, is that as far as I went? All right. So I don't know how I did on time. I'm good. I'm a little over. Okay, I'll stop. They hired a law professor.
You're good. I can see it in a few minutes.
All right. Okay.
You want to finish up?
No. I think, look, we are in a very difficult time, and in our work, and we work very closely with Athar and Cristian with Make the Road and the ACLU. Well, we are in defense right now. We are mitigating harms. We are defending minimal due process, the idea that you should be brought to court. To fix this, like I said, this is not a new American problem. To fix this, though, we will need a kind of conversation that we have never had with our politicians. There is no easy solution. I think what we have to be looking for is an orderly system of welcome, which has been America at its best, not a closed system of chaos and cruelty, which is what we basically have. And that is multifaceted. It involves significant financial investments in processing. It also involves a lot of rethinking of what the laws really should be. But before we get to that, I want to emphasize one thing that's often misunderstood. Even under the current laws, there is a great deal of discretion involved with the executive branch. So we can make even fairly broken laws work a bit more logically by using discretion and the power of the executive. Just this morning, the Department of Justice ruled that a child who has been found by a family court to be abused should be processed for as rapid a deportation as possible, rather than have their case put on hold because a visa will be available for them in a few years. That's a choice that the government is making. Someone woke up at the United States government and said, let's deport abused children as quickly as we can. Congress could fix that through legislation, so can the president or the attorney general. It's a discretionary choice. I can give you, and so can my friends here, dozens of other examples like that spread throughout the system where people are deciding to make the system more cruel. We don't have to do that. But it does require people being willing to say, it's good that immigrants are here. I'll stop with that.
The number of
Next, we'll have a video from the ACLU of Nevada.
Detained by Immigration and Customs Enforcement in Nevada continues to grow.
It's very personal to me to see the fear that my community is currently going through. My son is in 3rd grade. Many of his classmates, they're either undocumented or their families are undocumented. They're fearful.
A local swap meet temporarily closing its doors, citing concerns over immigration raids.
I am a business owner at Broad Acres. Broad Acres is an open flea market. There's live music, there's good food. Right now, with this current administration, he brings a lot of fear into the community.
It's so much hate in the world right now. It just feels unsafe.
Especially when they hear United States citizens are getting detained and deported. What are they really trying to do? What's going on?
I know right here. I do, brother.
If I didn't have the ACLU, I wouldn't have that backup.
Having trusted organizations that are willing to throw down with you when the moment comes, that helps you think through, even those scariest moments, that we're gonna be okay.
We represent the people in this community. Firewalls are designed to create barriers so that those on the other side of those barriers are not engulfed by the flames. In this instance, the ACLU's commitment is to establish a firewall for freedom all across the country so our state and local communities don't feel the nefarious effects of authoritarianism as the federal government reaches our doors.
This is the most repressive period in this country, certainly in my lifetime, and I think we're descending on a daily basis.
What does that fight look like? It means that there's lawsuits being filed when our neighbors are being kidnapped off the street.
Hey, we are not going to be holding individuals.
It means that you're gonna have a fighter in policy chambers that are protecting the rights of the people.
They're the big guns in a struggle where we're very outgunned.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Athar Haseebullah. I serve as the Executive Director for the American Civil Liberties Union of Nevada. A hometown kid from Nevada, Las Vegas specifically, where I manage to work right now 3 blocks away from the childhood home I grew up in. So I'm a hyper-local, one might say. But I'm also the child of immigrants who immigrated from Pakistan before I was born. And my interest and commitment to civil liberties and civil rights, which I'll discuss in a moment, is largely rooted in that experience, being a child of immigrants. And so many children of immigrants can relate to what they saw their parents go through in their journey, and to what they've seen their families go through in their respective journeys. Our organization is the state's largest civil liberties and civil rights organization. When I say civil liberties, I'm referring really to individual protections and rights that are afforded to you by the Constitution and by statute, and civil rights being the equal application of those rights to all people. We have over 7,000 members statewide. We cover all 17 counties within the state of Nevada, and we're part of a nationwide federated structure where we advance these rights for all individuals. When I say nationwide, I use that word specifically and don't say national because we have an affiliate in every state, and by and large, our work is done at the state level. We also maintain a national office where we work in conjunction with national partners to be at the forefront of advancing this work. We are a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. I stress that because I'd like to think that Democrats and Republicans hate us equally. Our responsibility is not to serve the interests of politicians. It's to preserve the interests of the people, especially in the face of government action. So we view ourselves as a government watchdog first and foremost, and I view our organization as an accountability partner for the government. Sometimes we have friends that need to be held accountable. And from our vantage point, there's few institutions that are capable of holding the government accountable. We're happy to fill that void, to make sure the government is working for people instead of against the interests of people. I'll mention how we do our work because I think it's pretty important. We do our work in 3 ways: through community engagement, through public policy advocacy, and also through systemic litigation. Community engagement can often refer to our extensive media work, which we do a lot of in Nevada to inform on issues, but it also means doing Know Your Rights trainings and keeping people abreast of what those rights are. For our organization, we've developed the most comprehensive set of Know Your Rights materials available in the state. They're translated into 5 languages, and they come in a variety of issue areas. In immigration, we have those available for K-12 settings, healthcare settings, university settings, healthcare settings, and also if you're encountering ICE on the street. We also offer free trainings For community organizations, if you run a community organization and you need to know your rights training, you can submit a request form online. We're happy to facilitate that. We'll provide the trainer. We just ask that you host the event, put together the community you need to that you think will benefit from the information, and we'll be there to assist. A lot of those trainings are done in conjunction with folks like Mike Kagan. This is probably our 5 millionth roadshow of the year. Consider us on tour at this point. Most of them are in Vegas, but they're frequent. So frequent, in fact, that I was joking with Jamie on my team earlier that I spent so much time as a practicing Muslim doing these Know Your Rights trainings at churches on Sunday. I can probably quote scripture better than most pastors, and if somebody told me to come in and flip a table like Jesus did, I'd be happy to do so, right? We also do our work through public policy advocacy. And we do that oftentimes by advocating at the federal level, but we also do that more prominently at the state and local levels. We're best known for stopping negative bills that will end up coming forward. And I think that's the ACLU's bread and butter. When something bad's happening, how do we put a stop to it? I'll share an example of that here in just a moment. But that piece is very, very critical because it's what also allows me to spend time here in Carson City every other year. So to the degree you want to host me for dinner next time I am here during a session, you are welcome to do so. We do our work via systemic litigation. We don't take on every individual case because somebody's had a civil rights violation. There's a lot of private attorneys that may be engaged in that. Our work is devoted and focused on systemic change, and that's involving government policy when there is a civil liberties or a civil rights violation. That comes in a variety of forms, and oftentimes there's intersectionality amongst issues. When I say intersectionality amongst issues, we work on immigration issues, but we also work on voting issues. We work on issues to protect the First Amendment and everybody's right to engage in speech and assembly and have a free press. We also work on Fourth Amendment issues to prevent unlawful searches and seizures, and work on issues preventing against cruel and unusual punishment. And this year's probably the first time I can recall being involved in this much litigation that focuses on states' rights, or this last 14 months, but that's also been a feature of what we've had to do. Because the reality is the issues that we're facing on a legal front, but on a civil liberties and civil rights front, is focused heavily right now on violations of states' rights. I'll give examples of those in just a moment. I'll give a really specific example of a policy, though, that I mentioned when we discussed what public policy looks like in terms of where we might find opposition. Yes, we'll work with partners to help advance good things and stop ICE enforcement in specific sensitive locations, a doctrine that was rolled back last year, which is really dangerous. But we're often known for stopping government surveillance and surveillance-related technologies when they come to be. One of the most prominent examples of that, which relied on misconceptions in terms of narrative forming for advocates of this, was related to traffic cameras. We opposed those bills, and we didn't oppose them just because we think there's issues with the confrontation clause, which there is, and the fact that there's predatory fees, which there is associated with them. We did it because the advent of technology has fundamentally changed the game for civil liberties and civil rights, and privacy is at the forefront of that. I'll give you a specific example of that. The companies that often engage in traffic camera purveyance or automatic license plate reader technology would seem to be doing a good thing. We're out here to help the community and prevent against harmful actions that occur on our streets. When in reality, the company that's most prominently featured here is known as Flock Technologies. Flock Technologies allows for any local police officer that signed an agreement, anywhere, doesn't really matter if it's the smallest department, to access their repository of information. What's contained within their repository of information? Information related to individuals' freedom of movement. And how has that technology been utilized? Well, ICE has used that at scale to track people's freedom of movement. It's also been utilized in places like Texas, where local law enforcement utilized that technology to track a woman to an abortion center. That's really dangerous technology when we talk about not knowing what's on the other side of this. See, civil liberties will only ever be violated under the guise of public safety. 100% of the instances where there's an attempt to violate civil liberties, there will be a public safety narrative on the other end, without an explanation of how this technology actually works. Very few people know how flock technology works, including the policymakers that advance these issues, which is why we take issue, why we fight so hard to oppose it. Nobody wants unsafe streets. That would just be silly. We don't want government taking advantage of people, especially when they're in their most sensitive time periods. And again, this could be utilized in instances where people are engaged in political meetings, where they're engaged in Know Your Rights training, if they're engaged in any level of advocacy, if they're going to a doctor for a specific treatment or service, a variety of different ways. That's why it's dangerous. On the legal front, our litigation docket is probably the most expansive in the state when it comes to suing the government. I take pride in that, and I'm always happy to have government step up to any debate stage and debate me. I know they're arguing with each other about who's going to debate whom, but if they're bored, I'm here and available and willing. They normally won't take the bait. But a few of those cases as it pertains to immigration are really critical right now. Alongside the UNLV Immigration Clinic, we're class counsel on entry without inspection, bond-related issues, where the Department of Homeland Security decided last year to deny bond to all of those individuals who were in custody. That now is a class action lawsuit in the District of Nevada in federal court. We're expecting a very favorable ruling on that at the end of this week, which will be good news, because already multiple people have been released from ICE custody as a result of that action. I recognize there's a lot of folks that'll say the law is broken. But you know, the reality of civil liberties and the way they apply to the United States as a whole is, if we examine them as being keys to enter into a house, no one tool is going to always work, and no one key is always going to work to get into the house. These keys are imperfect, just like the house is imperfect because the lock is imperfect. The law should not be conflated with justice. The law is a tool to be used to achieve justice. That's a tool we will use, but it's not the only tool, and I'd argue it may not even be the most important tool. That might be the mass mobilization of people to hold their government accountable, to mass mobilize, to ensure that the voices of the people are heard. But that's an instance where the key is working, because we're going to have a successful outcome on that, hopefully. I've been burned before, but I don't think that will happen here. A couple other cases we've worked on. Many of you might have seen, we're suing the Nevada Department of Motor Vehicles for secret and unlawful communication with ICE. What's incredibly notable about that is the lies being offered by a state government agency. And I specifically will say lie. If they want to come and refute me, they're welcome to do so. I don't think that'll ever happen, in large part because they've already been caught lying. The affidavits that were submitted stated there was no secret communications with ICE and no cooperation in that regard. After the last hearing, after their attorneys represented on the record before a judge that there was no communication of that nature occurring with ICE and no use of encrypted application signal to engage in those types of chats, they issued a clarifying statement, which said, in fact, they have been communicating with ICE and have done so via signal. That's problematic because those aren't the federal government's tax dollars, those are your tax dollars. But more broadly, what other types of information are being shared about Nevadans, regardless of whether or not it's immigrant communities or not, what other types of communications are occurring? I saw an article this morning about SNAP benefits and the DMV's sharing of information there. Our state agencies should not be sharing people's information, period. Period. The final case I'll mention is a 287G challenge we have against Las Vegas Metro, but that lawsuit will end up being repeated in other locations. 287G is effectively, there's a variety of types of it. I believe now there's 2 types. There were 3 types before in terms of the models that were being used, but that's a cooperation agreement between local governments and ICE. And that model is dangerous. It's dangerous because it's allowed for people who were summarily accused of crimes who might be detained to effectively be turned into ICE custody. But the most significant reason why I argue it's dangerous isn't just because of the impact. It is in fact because the government, in this instance local law enforcement, is engaged in an illegal agreement. Because local law enforcement in a Dillon's Rule state like ours does not have the legal authority to enter into these types of agreements with the federal government. There's a variety of other nefarious actions that are also occurring, including foreign-born policies, where information is being turned over to ICE for individuals who are labeled as foreign-born by law enforcement entities. Why is that problematic? Because, as you'll hear, that's not a reference to citizenship. right? It's a reference to where one might have been born and national origin, which inherently would violate Nevada's Equal Rights Amendment. I won't preview litigation now, but that's safe to say that'll be challenged at some point in the near future as well. We fight hard because we view the government as needing to comport to the same standards that they require all of us to comport to. I'm not encouraging anybody to break the law. I'm encouraging people to comply with the law. The first folks I encourage to comply with the law are the folks in government and the institutions that purport to represent the people. You cannot have a government that violates the law and demands on people who are poor, who are tired, who are weary, people who may be immigrants coming into the country, a different set of standards when people say follow the law than a government at the state, local, and federal levels that continue to break the law. As they continue to do that, we'll continue to challenge those policies. We'll continue to challenge those practices. We'll do so because we stand alongside our partners. You know, everybody, all of us want a brighter Nevada. We're not in the business anymore about arguing about ideological fallacies. And I have no interest in arguing with people who take ideologically inconsistent positions over and over and over, particularly on the issue of immigration. When we come down to the core of the issues, if we want a Nevada that's brighter for tomorrow, economics included, sustainability included for what our society looks like, a community that derives passion and compassion in how we treat others, we need to make sure that we're all participating in these types of conversations, having these conversations with elected officials who may not be having those conversations, and not stymieing the ability to engage in free speech and discourse by threatening censorship for media outlets, for users who participate in these conversations, not threatening people for having conversations or having disagreements, but instead utilizing that as a marker for what prosperity for our community might ultimately look like.
Right. Good evening, everyone. And I am so honored to be here on behalf of ACDC. And first, I'd like to take a moment to thanking our host for bringing us all together here. And since we're gathering during Women's History Month, I want to honor the incredible women in this room and particularly, of course, in the audience. So thank you for the work that you do every day. And whether it is in your professional role, in your communities, and in your families, your contribution and your leadership makes a difference. And it's really inspiring for women showing up today and also leading and supporting one another. I'm honored again to be among women and men in this panel. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to be in this space and conversation with all of you. Again, I'm Edelweiss Solano, and I'm the Senior Director at the Asian Community Development Council, or ACDC. And in my role, I oversee the many programs that support the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities here in Nevada. I was born in the Philippines, and my own immigrant journey really shaped the work that I do today. And over the years, I've worked with individuals and families who are navigating the complex systems, such as enrolling for affordable health insurance, citizenship assistance, applying for SNAP benefits, translation, and just basically accessing resources. And I've also had the opportunity to serve with the Clark County Asian Pacific Community Commission, but the heart of what I do is also is really about helping bridge cultural and systematic gaps so that families and individuals in our communities have the support that they need and the resources to do well and succeed here in our state. And next slide, please. So let me start by sharing a little bit about our organization. So the Asian Community Development Council, or ACDC, is a nonprofit and nonpartisan organization dedicated to building, connecting, and educating the AA NHBI community here in Nevada. Yes, we are not the rock band, but we still rock, like what we say. So we were officially chartered in 2015, and our mission is very simple but important: to improve the overall well-being and education of the AA, NHBI, and other ethnic communities here in Nevada. And we do this by connecting people to resources, advocating for equity, and building a stronger community together. Next slide, please. A big part of what we do is focusing on helping immigrant families connect to resources and meeting their most basic needs. And things like housing, food, access to health insurance, access to health care, while also helping them build stability for the future. For example, our team provides one-on-one multilingual assistance to help families and individuals enroll in SNAP benefits. And through our distribution efforts, we've also distributed more than 5 million pounds of food across Nevada. We also work hard to provide culturally relevant foods that respect religious and cultural traditions. Health is another major focus. And through our Health Navigator program, we've helped thousands of Nevadans apply and enroll in qualified and affordable health insurance through our state-based marketplace. And we've also provided culturally competent care through our HAPPY stands for the Healthy Asian Pacific Islander Medical Center, which we opened in 2022 to help ensure families receive the care in a language and environment that they feel comfortable with. But beyond the basic needs, we also support families through our citizenship assistance. So we host free legal clinics and have helped more than 1,400 individuals with their N400 applications and apply for fee waivers if they are eligible, and provide legal review through our pro bono attorneys. And civic engagement is also equally important. Through our outreach efforts, we've also helped register more than 43,800 voters statewide, and helping ensure that the AA-NH community has a voice in Nevada's democracy. In fact, about 253,000 out of the 2,366,000 in Nevada are Gen Z voters, so we try to engage the youth and educate them in getting out to registering to vote and when eligible, getting out to vote. And that percentage also of the Gen Z voted in 2024 was 57.2%. Next slide, please. Also, ACDC works to support entrepreneurs and small businesses within our community. So we partner with the AAPI Chamber of Commerce and previously with the Nevada Small Business Development Center through the Nevada Grow program in order to help them navigate getting business requirements, licenses, and we've expanded this work to provide vocational pathways also. And we love celebrating our community. So annually, we host the Asian Lantern Festival, and it's now called the Asian Lantern Festival, formerly known as the Asian Night Market, in which we highlight AA and HBI local businesses and have cultural performance. Oh, okay. Right. So, and here in Reno, in fact, we host also, it will be our third year to host the Asian Autumn Festival, formerly known as the Asian Moon Festival, we held it at the J Resorts also, in supporting the local AA and HBI business owners. here in Reno. And we brought this opportunity to the national stage by helping coordinate the first AA NHBI night market at the Vice President's residence in Washington, D.C. back in 2024. So this is really a great opportunity for our organization to highlight and support the local ANHBI business owners and entrepreneurs to show their talent and entrepreneurship. Next slide, please. So now let's look at the numbers behind our community. So Nevada's AANHBI population is deeply shaped by the immigrant experience. About 52% of Asian Americans and 11% of Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders in our state are immigrants. And what's particularly notable is the strong level of civic engagement. AANHBI immigrants have the highest naturalization rate of any racial group, about 69 and 61% respectively. In Nevada, that translates to more than 1/3 of Asian Americans and 7% of ANHBI residents being naturalized citizens. But these numbers tell a bigger story. Our communities are not just living in Nevada. They're building lives, raising families, starting a business, and making this state their home. So it's not just being present here, but they're fully invested in making sure there's a future for the neighborhoods, our economy, and also democracy. Next slide, please. Thank you. When we talk about immigrant communities, the focus is on how they adapt to the United States. But what's really important is how they contribute in Nevada. And that impact is huge. Today, ANHBI, the fastest growing community here and population here in the state of Nevada, and make about 14% Nevada as Nevada residents. Economically, AANHBI owned businesses generate over $5 billion annually and provide jobs for nearly 50,000 Nevadans. And the professional impact is also very significant. For example, 30% of the registered nurses are ANHBI. And we saw this during the pandemic as they were the front lines when our healthcare system needed them the most. Our community is also well represented in technology and manufacturing, and the services has grown by 150% over the past decades. And politically, we're seeing an increased engagement as well. In the 2022 election, AANHBI first-time voters turned out in record numbers, becoming what many analysts call the margin of victory here in Nevada. And all of these data shows that immigrant communities aren't just here to ask for help. We're building businesses, we're creating jobs, we're caring for our families, and we're driving our state forward. Next slide, please. And yet, even with all of these successes that we've talked about, there's still a misconception that all Asian Americans are doing well. And this is the so-called model minority myth, but the reality is really much complicated. Here in Nevada, 1 in 4 Asian Americans and nearly 1 in 3 NHBI residents live in low-income households. And when we look closer, the disparities are even more striking. Nearly half of Cambodians, Samoan, and Taiwanese American families struggle to make ends meet. So housing is really a huge challenge too. So about 45% of ANHBI renters in Nevada spend more than 30% of their income just on rent. So when that much of the income goes to housing, there's barely anything left for food, health insurance, and transportation. And that's why the work that we do at ACDC is really important. And the programs that we offer, the free programs that we offer, are again, really important for our community. And many of the families in our communities really fall through the cracks. And not because they're not working hard, but because their struggles are often invisible. It's invisible behind the stereotypes, and we're here to make sure that the support they need are being given to them as well. It's that it's available, and there are resources for them. And next slide, please. And at this point, I'd like to pause and talk about something more personal. So for many immigrants, just like myself, the journey to belonging in this country takes years and sometimes decades. And even after settling here, many of us still are seen as perpetual foreigners. And as you know, the process of becoming a U.S. citizen is and building a career in an organization or and having a business and even establishing a life here is not a straight line. So this slide represents some of our team members receiving their U.S. citizenship, and like many immigrants, we came here in search of better opportunities. And yes, Professor Kagan, it's also because the economy is not crashing and the food is great. So, but kidding aside, I moved to the United States in 2013, leaving behind a stable job, as well as my friends and family. I went through the entire naturalization journey myself, and in January of 2024, I proudly became a U.S. citizen. Thank you. And just like my peers, they also became U.S. citizen. And for the years that I've helped many eligible permanent residents, guiding them through the process, making sure they build confidence as they take the test and go through the interviews, and watching them wave the American flag at their ceremonies, and experiencing that same moment myself was incredibly meaningful. And I would also say that with my other colleagues who experienced the same way. So next slide, please. Again, statistics show that ANHBI is growing quickly in Nevada, but those numbers don't show the long and difficult journey so many immigrants get here. For many families, like what I mentioned earlier, the American dream isn't easy. It's navigating complex legal systems, overcoming language barriers. You're stretching every dollar to make ends meet. So becoming a U.S. citizen is not just paperwork. It's years of sacrifice, perseverance, and hope. And for so many, that moment when you finally take that oath, it's really important, and it makes their dream become real. And then that's a time when they truly feel they belong in this country that they now call home. Next slide, please. Okay, many immigrants want to become U.S. citizen, but the process isn't easy. There are real barriers. And first, the N400 application alone costs $760, which can already be a challenge for many families. And when you go through a legal consultation, that will range from $3,000 to $5,000. So that's really such a lot of money for some. Also, language can be a barrier. And it is also, the process makes it very intimidating. For many non-native speakers, studying for the civic test and navigating the paperwork can be very daunting. And so the cost for these are really high, and that's where the organization ACDC steps in, so that we bridge the gap, so cost, language, or even the lack of information don't stand in the way of pursuing citizenship. Next slide, please. Thank you. So there are very few meaningful ways on how we can all support the immigrant communities here in Nevada. First, support and donate. Contribution helps sustain programs for support services such as the food, legal clinics, and also emergency services that a lot of underserved unserved families rely on. Second, support local businesses. So by intentionally, shopping, eating at local NHBI owned businesses, you're strengthening also the local economy. And third is uplifting community stories. So when we share the real experiences of our community, we challenge those stereotypes and build understanding. And finally, advocate. Your voice can help remove unnecessary barriers to citizenship, economic opportunity, and safety. And I would say that at the end of the day, Nevada's strength really comes from diversity. And our communities may come from different places, but we are all working together for the same future, is that building a stronger Nevada together. Again, thank you very much.
It's a good setup for my part of the presentation. But before we begin, I just want to say today it's going to be about the obstacles to citizenship and being undocumented and documented immigrant. Professor Kagan kind of set up what we've been seeing, what the new policy is, what the challenges are, and now I'm going to be diving a little more into it, okay? And my name is Cristian Gonzalez. I'm the supervising attorney with Make the Rule Nevada, and I like to proudly state I'm a DACA attorney, trademark pending. All right, so let's get into it. So next slide, please. Oh. Yeah, and FYI, you might need to press it a couple of times. Sorry. So to begin, so I'm not gonna go too much into it because Edelweiss already kind of covered some of it as to the elements or the requirements for applying for citizenship. Again, you have to be 18 years old, have to be a legal permanent resident for at least 5 years, 3 years if you haven't already been married to a US citizen for at least 2 years, have to have been continuously present in the United States for those at least 5 years, and out of those 5 years, you cannot be having been absent or left the country, whether on vacation or just for other visits, for at least 30 months. So you have to have been primarily here in the United States. One of the other things that the USCIS, which is the immigration agency that looks over reviews and then decides whether to grant or deny the applications for citizenship, they looked also as to what's called good moral character. I'll get into that into a little bit more, but they generally look at the past 5 years from when you submitted the application and determine whether you have had good moral character. You also have to take the test, as we mentioned at the beginning, the little test. I don't know how many of you can pass it, but that's usually the test that people have to take to become a citizen. And then you have to show by a preponderance of the evidence, which is the fancy legal term to say more likely than not, that you have met all the requirements. And this part is really important because that's one of the shifts that we've been seeing and one of the new obstacles that the current administration is trying to push to prevent folks from becoming citizens or to deny people citizenship. Pass the citizenship test and take the oath of allegiance. Next slide. So what's good moral character? Well, you can define it multiple ways. So the first way I looked into was what Merriam-Webster, which it's the dictionary, defines it. So let's break it apart. So with good, it can be defined as being to one's liking, having sufficient worth or merit to receive one's honor, esteem, or reward. Or another definition can be having the required skills for an acceptable level of performance, meeting the requirements of a purpose or situation, or promoting or contributing to personal or social well-being. So that's what generally the dictionary defines as good. Moral is the conforming to a high standard of morality or virtue, guided by or in accordance with one's sense of right and wrong. And then the character. The conduct that conforms to an accepted standard of right and wrong, overall quality as seen or judged by people in general. So when you take it all apart, what does it mean? Well, if you take the dictionary definition, you look at someone that has esteemed qualities, has virtue, it's pretty much not doing anything wrong, not breaking the laws, anything like that. But what's the definition that the agency, USCIS, uses to determine whether someone deserves to be granted citizenship or to deny? So this is a definition. They look at the character, which measures up to the standards of average citizens of the community in which the non-citizen resides. Yeah. Well, now let's get to it. So, what are the requirements to show good moral character? We saw the definition from the dictionary side, and we saw the the definition from the agency itself. So what are they looking at or what are they telling folks that are applying for citizenship that they're looking at, or when considering whether someone has good moral character or does not have good moral character? So some of the things that they look at, again, they used to, and I say used to because that's the shift that the agency has right now, is that they used to look at the past 5 years from when you're submitting your application for citizenship. So if someone committed a DUI or got a traffic ticket, and that was 6 years ago, they wouldn't look at that. That was the previous policy. One of the shifts that we're seeing under this administration is that they're kind of using that as a suggestion. So now they're looking at everybody, the applicant's overall history, regardless of whether they were cited with a DUI, whether they had like a traffic tickets that was like 10, 20, 30 years ago. They're looking at it and then weighing it and giving it more weight than it should be, than the INS, which is the immigration laws, purport them to have. So that's one of the barriers that we're seeing that USCIS is using to prevent or deny, or to justify denying the applications for citizenship. So some of the things that they also look at is the family ties and background. As Professor Kagan stated, many of the undocumented and documented folks living here in Nevada have been present for more than 20 years. So they're looking at whether they have already established family ties, whether they have been involved in the community, and their background. The absence or presence of other criminal history, their education, if someone came into the United States when they were young, whether they've already been going through the K through 12 system and then do the college or trade school, they look at all the educational history, employment history, their law-abiding behavior, and this is kind of like in quotes, because it doesn't mean that they're not just breaking the laws, but they're also paying taxes or that they're meeting their financial obligations. Whether that's paying child support or making sure that they're paying their fines if they get like a traffic ticket. So that's a behavior that USCIS is saying that they're looking at. Community involvement, their credibility, compliance with probation, and the length of time that they have been present in the United States, as well as whether they have had any criminal convictions. I'll get us to what's the issue with the criminal convictions in a bit, but that's just generally what USCIS has stated that they want to look at to determine whether someone has good moral character or not. Next slide. Oh, sorry about that. Next slide. Okay. So the obstacles to citizenship. So the first one, as I mentioned, is the criminal convictions, and this is where you can kind of get into the weeds. The legal nerds will look into it, and you can always argue what's a conviction, what's not a conviction. And so this is one of the other shifts that we're seeing how the administration is pushing into how these terms are being defined to justify denying or making it seem that folks have a conviction that could potentially bar them from either applying for citizenship or that will make them removable, meaning that they can be deported from the country. So what's a criminal conviction? So it's defined as a formal judgment of guilt entered by the court. A judge or jury has found the person guilty, or the persons enter a plea of guilty or nolo contest, meaning no contest, or has admitted sufficient facts to warrant a finding of guilt. It also means that the judge has ordered some form of punishment, penalty, or imposed a restraint on the person's liberty. This is where it's important that when folks get arrested, and they don't get just handed over to ICE, as we already mentioned with the 287G program, but that they were the lucky few that got to go through the criminal process. This is where having a public defender or an attorney that has the knowledge about the immigration consequences can come into play and can affect whether someone, when they make a plea deal or when they're trying to enter a plea in the criminal case, can affect or have the consequences in the immigration context. Depending on the plea, this is where if you have the background for immigration and the public defender has this background as well, or they can at least have advice from an experienced criminal immigration attorney, they can then try to craft or adjust the pleas to make sure that they don't have immigration consequences. The United States Supreme Court, in a case called Padilla versus United States, that one has already made it mandatory that the criminal defense attorneys have to notify their clients as to the criminal consequences of any plea agreement that they enter into. Now, That said, how it gets applied can affect in many different ways, because in many jurisdictions, it can simply mean that the attorney can just tell the client, hey, this can have immigration consequences, but I'm not gonna, they don't explain what, or why that will have the immigration consequences. The other thing that can affect, or what can affect someone in their immigration process, is if they have juvenile convictions. Now, generally speaking, juvenile convictions shouldn't be, under the immigration law, they're not considered to be convictions if the person committed them as a juvenile, anyone under 18. However, in states where someone can be tried as an adult, and Nevada is one of them, where someone can be tried as an adult for certain crimes, that can result in that if that person as a juvenile gets charged as an adult and then gets convicted, for purposes of immigration, that is a criminal conviction. The other one would be deferrals of adjudication, meaning that in this instance, where someone enters a plea, but then the judgment itself doesn't get finalized, it gets deferred, whether they get put into a process of rehabilitation, and then if they complete the terms, then at that point you revisit it and determine whether it's gonna be a guilty or if it gets split down. That can also result into what's being considered a criminal conviction for immigration purposes. Next slide. Vacated judgments, this is one of the other ones. So let's say, for example, after a certain amount of time, the court dismisses the case, or your judgment, your guilty plea gets dismissed or gets vacated by the court. That in the criminal context will mean, you no longer have that conviction. However, that's not the case in immigration. Even if the judgment has been vacated, that still will affect your that will still be considered a conviction and can prevent you from becoming a citizen or creating issues throughout your process in the immigration process. However, the only exception is that if your conviction was vacated because there was a constitutional issue, whether there was a constitutional violation or there was a defect in the process, that will not count as a criminal conviction. If someone just does it because they met the requirements of their, if it was like a defer agreement where they're not being completely charged, and they completed the terms of the agreement, and now it gets reduced or gets vacated, that wouldn't count. That will still be counted as a conviction because that was not due to a violation of a constitutional right or a defect. Expunge records. We've seen this after a certain amount of time. Folks have the right to seal the records. For the immigration process, even if if your criminal record gets expunged, it's still considered a conviction, and that can still prevent you from applying to become a citizen, or in the worst kinds of contexts that we can see in this administration, can be used to justify detaining you and putting you in removal proceedings if you're not a citizen yet. Next slide. So what are the bars to... So I already mentioned the convictions and all, but then there's also other bars that can prevent that by the immigration law becomes a bar that prevents you from being found to have good moral character. So if you have been convicted of a murder, aggravated felony, crimes of violence, persecution, genocide, torture, severe violations of religious freedom, if you have been found to have done any of these things, then it gets automatically assumed that you don't have good moral character. One of the things, the more dangerous things that we're seeing in this administration is towards the latter, the last part, the severe violations of religious freedom, when we're starting to see the claims by the government when someone's advocating and exercising the First Amendment rights for supporting Palestine, that they're being claimed as being anti-Semitic, and that can have consequences, especially if the person doesn't have any, and is not a citizen, or even if they're a legal permanent resident, that can have issues because they can be barred from being demonstrated to have good moral character if the government argues that it's a violation of religious freedom. Conditional bars, meaning that they can be conditional. It can be that you have controlled substance violations. That can be specifically applied here in Nevada, where in the state law, marijuana is legal. Federally speaking, however, it's still an illegal substance. So folks that are undocumented, that are legal permanent residents, if they've been found to be using, legally buying marijuana in the state of Nevada, but then they get detained, that can be used against them because that's still violating the federal violations of DUI, false claims to U.S. citizenship, unlawful voter registration, and unlawful voting. With the false claims to U.S. citizenship, that can potentially come about even in instances where, for example, someone has already was undocumented previously, they work with a fake social security number. If that's a fake social security number happens to be for a citizen, or if they try to apply for something that requires them to be citizens, the government can come back and try to argue that that was a false claim to your citizenship. False claims to your citizenship can become permanent bars and prevent someone from applying for any immigration benefit. Then there's other acts such as being reckless, or if you have habitual traffic infractions, harassment or aggressive solicitation, not paying child support, or following through with your family obligations, or violating terms of probation or conditions imposed by the court, and not paying or owing taxes. Next slide. One of the things that the government has started to do that it used to do previously back in the 90s, but then that kind of died down as time progressed because it was found to be ineffective and a waste of resources. But what we're seeing now to be brought back is the neighborhood visits. So one of the things that the immigration laws allow the agency to do is that if someone applies for to become a citizen, they can send out officers and conduct what's called a neighborhood visit, which is going to that person's neighborhood and asking neighbors and anyone around there about whether they know the person that's applying and whether they can attest to their good moral character. Again, as I mentioned, that was done previously, but then was discontinued because it was found to have been a waste of resources, and it really didn't came to make much of a difference as to whether someone has good moral character or not. But that's something that we're starting to see now that's to be done and being implemented by this administration, and that can become an obstacle, especially if someone has just moved from one place to another, and maybe, some people don't like talking to their neighbors. So if they have these visits, they can justify that, just because you don't talk to your neighbors or you don't socialize as much, that they can use it against you to find that you don't have good moral character. And then there's also the anti-Americanism. As we've seen with all of with the protests and all the advocacy that we're having, any social media posts that someone posts on their social media, or any advocacy that they're trying to do, whether they participate in a protest, that can be found to have been considered as anti-American, and they can justify to say that because you participated in a protest, even though you were exercising your First Amendment right, and because let's be clear, anyone that's living in the United States, it has rights, and that also includes your First Amendment right, is that just because you participated and were lawfully exercising your First Amendment right, you are going to find you to be anti-American, and therefore you don't have good moral character. Next slide. One of the also new obstacles is the new citizenship test. As you can see in the little thing, prior to October 20, 2025, there used to be a different version of the test. The previous version only required that it was only 100 questions, and you only had to answer 6 out of 10 of those questions correctly. Now, the new test, however, it went up to 128 questions from the previous 100, and now you have to get 12 out of 20 questions correctly. The format of the questions also changed. Some of the questions before were more simple fact questions, whether you kind of like trivia, this fact, that fact. Now it's more of a how or why kind of question, where it requires that the person actually explain more. That becomes an obstacle, especially for folks that are trying to apply for citizenship after, as we heard, can be waiting for decades or multiple years before they can apply for a citizenship. And if they're still learning the language, or they might have a limited capacity of speaking English, that can affect their ability to actually complete the test. So next slide. So those are the obstacles for citizenship. Now, let's step back from the citizenship aspect, and I'll look at how many persons can be considered to have been documented immigrants versus non-immigrants, because their ability to remain in the country, and as we know as the rightful way, it's also being attacked, which also puts persons in danger from being removed from the country, even if they haven't done anything wrong. So the different categories of what's considered to be a documented immigrant, first of all, you have the lawful permanent residents, or green card holders, as more commonly known. You also have the family-based petition immigrants. So those are folks that came on a fiancé visa, or if they were already married to a U.S. citizen, as we saw that, just because you're married to a U.S. citizen and you're undocumented doesn't mean that you can automatically apply for legal status. But however, if you were a victim of abuse, whether it was by that spouse, that child, or a parent, you can self-petition yourself through what's called a VAWA petition. Those for folks that can be considered documented immigrants. Employment-based petitions, those will be the employment-based, so the non-citizens with extraordinary ability, so you can have like actors, athletes, or the scientists, or the Einstein visa. The Einstein visa will be one of them. Then you have the advanced degree holding non-citizens, so those professionals, whether it's doctors, holders of bachelor's degrees that have shown that they have an exceptional ability, professionals, attorneys, not necessarily the doctors, but other professionals, and then the non-citizen investors. So you can buy your way into getting a visa. Then you have the humanitarian status, which is the refugees. So those are folks that were granted the ability to come to the United States from another country, because they have been found to have been, whether they're escaping war, famine, the refugees, which is different than the asylees. Those are folks that were not they were not admitted prior to coming to the United States, but rather they came to the United States because they were fleeing persecution, or they were fearful of returning from their to home country, and they applied for asylum status here in the United States, and that's a legal process. Asylum is legal. And then you also have the temporary protected status. So those are folks that that the Department of Homeland Security has identified as citizens from a certain country, and then the country that depends on the country, that they're unable to return to their country because of a natural disaster, because there's war ongoing, so they deserve to have protected status in the United States. Then you also have the special categories. The special categories it's pretty much where they don't fit into the previous categories. So that's where you have what's considered to be called documented dreamers. Documented dreamers are not DACA holders. Documented dreamers are generally the children of folks that came under any of the previous categories. So specifically, if you came on a work visa and you brought your family with you, they will be considered documented dreamers or have the ability to remain in the United States. However, they don't have the ability themselves to then apply for legal status because they came based on their parent status of a work visa. Then you have the special immigrant juvenile status, as it was previously alluded. Those are the children that were found by a state court to have either been abused, neglected, or abandoned by a parent, and they were able to apply for this status that then allows them to apply for legal residency and then eventually citizenship. You have the victims of crime, victims of trafficking, certain Afghan and Iraqi nationals. Those are generally the folks that help our armed forces when they were in the wars in the Middle East, whether they were interpreters or that helped the armed forces during their period over there. The Panama Canal Zone, so those are the list of all the different categories that can be considered documented immigrants. So as you can see, it's a really broad category. Next slide.
Cristian, I'm so sorry to cut you off. I think we're going to switch to some of the questions.
Oh, yeah. That was just kind of just to wrap it up. There's many obstacles. There's different categories of folks that are here in the United States, but the main obstacles are pretty much the delays in adjudication, the increased fees, as has already been stated, the abuse of discretion, where they're trying to justify or extend the meaning of how they explain things to justify denying petitions, as well as the increase of criminalization of immigrants.
Thank you so much. All those presentations were super educational and informational. I think when there's so much national news and you get so much information through your phone, it really grounds me to hear from organizations that are in Nevada, that are on the ground in Nevada, helping people here and learning about what's going on in our state. The panelists throughout tonight, touched on different things that the administration is doing to make it harder for immigrants in Nevada, but as Mike mentioned, this isn't new. So Mike, when in history have we seen really strong anti-immigrant sentiments, and kind of what similarities do you see today?
Well, I'll tell you, the first time I came to Carson City was when my oldest daughter, who's now a sophomore at UNLV, was in 4th grade, and I was a chaperone on a field trip, and we stayed overnight here, and we went up to Virginia City. I don't know, has anyone been to the Schoolhouse Museum in Virginia City? All right, good. I've been there twice, and there's an exhibit in there about anti-Chinese riots. I'm not, that's actually would be wrong to say that was the first time that there was an anti-immigrant backlash in the United States, but it was one of the most influential. It spread across the whole United States and definitely affected Nevada. Just incredible level. There were lynchings, actually, of Chinese immigrants in California. And what my family and from Eastern Europe would have called pogroms in many cities. And so that actually led to the first modern American immigration law, which was the Chinese Exclusion Act. I think the other periods of history that I would look at, the period when members of my family were deported in the 1920s and the Red Scare, that actually was when the ACLU was born. It was partly a response to not just the crackdown on immigrants, but on civil liberties after World War I. It was a very repressive period, and I think also in different groups targeted after World War II during the McCarthy era. We have been through this before, and we go through these rounds at various times. The fears and the stereotypes are often recycled and repurposed for different groups of people. And it's one of the interesting things is how groups that were favored at one time will be targeted at another time. No one is really immune.
Thank you. Nevada is not seeing, massive roundups, workplace raids. As you guys mentioned, a lot of the enforcement is happening inside jails or with local law enforcement. But I'm curious, do you think what's happening in Minnesota could happen here, and what's shielding us from that? If there's what do you think is shielding us? Athar, what do you hear from your ACLU colleagues in other states, and what could the future look like in Nevada?
Yeah, look, we have seen significant increased immigration enforcement here, as Mike alluded to. The difference between what's happening in Nevada and other places, and again, when I'm saying Nevada, there's very strong similarities between what's happening in Washoe County, what's happening in Clark County, and the rest of the state. But it is different than what we're seeing in some other parts of the country, whether that's Minneapolis or Chicago or Los Angeles or other major urban cities of that nature. I attribute that specifically, and I'll give one specific reason. Nevada remains the tourism capital of this country, and that is the single largest economic driver for this state. That economic driver is also invested in specific political campaigns on and behalf of the administration. That is documented. That's not something I'm sharing. That should be a shock. You can go look up the FEC reports and you'll see that. I don't think it has anything to do with the fact that we have a Republican governor. I don't quite honestly think that the Trump administration cares about a specific party. I think there is a vested interest in preserving the financial integrity of the machine under which they operate or by which they operate politically. And let's face it, if you see individuals being round up on the corner based on the color of their skin, because that's what ICE has in fact done in communities nationwide, if you see that occurring, and you have a third of our tourism industry that travels internationally, including from places like Canada, where people are also petrified of now coming to the United States for what might happen, it doesn't make it appealing. The worst image and aesthetic that could happen for Las Vegas is tourists showing up, and we see an incident like what happened in New York City, where a Chilean woman was grabbed off of the street, separated from her daughter, and placed in ICE detention. That is not good for a tourism economy. And in a competitive international marketplace, when you're competing with places like the Caribbean, like Zanzibar, like Dubai, despite what's happening even in the Middle East right now, it doesn't make it appealing. People have options when they choose to travel. And you add the factor of affordability in Nevada, and couple that now with the fact that you might get picked up by some random person who throws on a mask and just got hired 3 weeks ago for a $50,000 bonus, it doesn't exactly provide a lot of confidence for people that want to come to the state.
And Edelweiss mentioned in her presentation, and same thing Athar just talked about, also how immigrants fuel Nevada's hospitality industry. Another one, if you go skiing in Tahoe, that's very reliant on J-1 visas. Edelweiss, talk more about, you mentioned nursing, manufacturing, but what would happen if there is, what would happen with decreases in immigration to Nevada's economy in these major industries?
A very good question, and thank you for that. Attorney Athar mentioned earlier that the immigrant community is the economic driving force in our state, and majority of the workforce, especially in the restaurant service industry, make up the Nevada's economy contributors. So if there is a decline in that, that will really affect our service industry, as well as the thousands of not just the service industry, the restaurant, but as well as in the healthcare. And as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, back in the pandemic when the healthcare our healthcare system needed it the most, that's where the immigrant community came in. And at the same time, which I also mentioned in the presentation earlier, is that the driving force behind our economy is from the restaurant owners and those who work in that industry. So we really see a great contribution in not just in healthcare, but also in hospitality, technology, and small businesses. So again, they're helping drive economic growth, entrepreneurship, and innovation that makes our state move forward.
Thank you, Edelweiss. And I know we already have a lot of gaps in the healthcare providers, so that's just one big industry. I'm glad that you talked about it. With all of these changes making it more difficult for the pathway to citizenship, Athar mentioned that he's doing, that the ACLU Nevada is doing Know Your Rights events, same with Make the Road. Cristian, what's even the biggest piece of advice that you're giving people right now? What are you sharing to the undocumented immigrant community, and kind of how do they navigate this current atmosphere?
So what we do at Make the Road is we're currently hosting what's called family preparedness clinics. And I think that's the best way that we can help folks during these times. The purpose of the family preparedness clinics is pretty much we help folks prepare a packet. And that packet contains all the information that someone might need if the worst were to happen. Here, the worst being that they get detained or they get deported. Most of the times when folks are getting picked up, it's usually the breadwinner or one or both parents get picked up, get detained, but then what happens to the rest of the family? If the parents are the ones holding all the documents, the important documents, or know where they are, what about if they're detained now, so what happens? So the purpose of the family preparedness packet is that we compile all of that information in a single place, and then along with the packet, we also include some legal forms that folks can help folks, whether they get detained or if they get deported. Such of those forms can be, if they have children, nominations of guardian. So if the children are going to remain in the United States, they can fill out the nomination of guardian, so another caregiver can step in and take care of the children. That can be either the nomination of guardian or a temporary 6-month guardianship. They can also fill out documents such as a power of attorney, whether it's for healthcare matters or financial matters. With a financial matter, power of attorney is specifically tailored to only become effective or to spring into effectiveness when that person has been detained or has been deported. That way, whoever gets named as the agent in the power of attorney can then be able to facilitate whether it's selling their property or moving the funds, so that way, if the folks get deported, they can still have access to their funds or sell their property and be able to facilitate the things. So those are some of the things that we're doing with Make the Road, as well as holding out the Know Your Rights workshops, so that way we can inform folks about what rights they have. Because there's a misconception that just because you're undocumented, that you don't have rights, and that's just wrong. Everyone in the United States has rights, including undocumented folks, so we try to educate them so that way they know what their rights are, so that if they get to be stopped by whether it's ICE or whether it's the police, they know how to exercise their rights to minimize the danger that such a confrontation can have. And that way they can, instead of being detained, they can at least walk away knowing that they have protected their rights, or at least minimize any possibility of any negative outcomes.
You talked about families, and I have a specific audience question here. Kind of, what is the law specifically toward the detention of children? Do these laws stipulate the social, educational, development, health needs of children under 17 that need to be provided in detention facilities? Mike, Athar, Cristian, I don't know if you guys can take this.
I'll try. The United States is detaining children again. We had stopped doing that for a while. We're doing it again. The conditions for the children, frankly, are very, very unclear. In theory, they should have to live up to standards of local child welfare programs, but we don't have child welfare that locks people in anywhere else for any other group of people. So these are baby jails, and that's what they are. So to talk, I think, about child welfare within a situation like that is a misnomer. We are locking up kids. We've done that before. We've done that under both Democrats and Republicans. We have not always done it. The law does not require it. It's a choice, and that is what we are choosing.
And just to add on to that, there's also that when the children are detained, they can be released to a parent or a relative. However, one of the things that we've seen that keeps these kids in detention is that the administration is currently pushing so that anyone that can sponsor to become a sponsor, so that way the kids no longer detained, is being put in danger. Because some of the requirements to become a sponsor that the administration is now implementing is that they're requiring that the person get vetted. Okay, but then that also, the getting better will mean that if someone's undocumented, and like they say they're the parent of the child is coming to the United States to reunite with the parent, if they try to go through the vetting process, they're outing themselves to ICE and putting themselves now in danger of being detained. And so we're seeing these instances where the relatives, if they're undocumented, they're no longer stepping up to become sponsors, so that way the kid's no longer in detention, because they're afraid that doing so will make them get deported.
I'll just add on real quick. I think part of the challenge and the reason why I kept bringing up transparency over and over is it's very difficult to take the government's word for anything when it comes to conditions within detention, especially as it pertains to children. I think that notion has only grown more significant when we discuss child welfare and the concept of the Department of Justice's failure to release all transparent records related to the Epstein files. And that is an ongoing issue. A lot of us have a great deal of suspicion surrounding the government's purveyance of messaging for conditions that they'll say are fine, only to be disproven 6 months later in court allegations where you see almost torturous conditions there. So the reality is government should make this concept of how they're treating children totally transparent without going through 6-month redaction periods, and they should stop denying access to members of Congress and attorneys who are attempting to go into the facilities that they continue to block.
And Athar, there was actually during the special legislative session a couple immigrant protection pieces kind of slipped through and passed in the governor's crime bill. Advocates wanted way more, but one was actually around transparency of who is detained in Nevada. Has that improved, or have you seen any status update on what passed in November?
There's actually there's a couple extra ones. I'm not going to get in trouble by outing myself for the ones that I wrote that actually got put forward in another language. So I'll talk about the couple within the crime bill that came forward. One actually prohibits law enforcement officers engaged, effectively immigration enforcement as well, from entering onto school campuses. That's an important thing to do. But I'm going to qualify it because there's really, really important pieces of this that matter. That means on school property in and of itself. It doesn't mean the area immediately adjacent to a school. It also will end up likely, if they choose to do that, being subject to litigation, and the reason why is because they stated law enforcement officer without including a specific definition associated with such. Most of us would perceive ICE agents to be law enforcement officers, but they may make the argument that they're in fact not, right? Because this is part of the creative attempts that they've engaged to try to work around almost every single issue. The second piece of that was related to transparency when it comes to who's in detention. And it requires an actual listing made available of detention centers within the state of Nevada that actually have a list and repository of the information available for who's housed there. And part of the reason why that came forward is because the state senator that was involved, and I credit him for doing this, Edgar Flores, actually had multiple clients that had reached out, much the same way we have. From their families reached out and said, this person got detained. We don't know where they are. And the reality is you cannot easily trace people to where they are. You don't know if they got picked up and got sent to a jail, including the Henderson Detention Center or in Washoe, and the repository may not automatically be available. So this gives an opportunity within those two detention centers to look through in real time and see if an individual is there. Is it a catch-all, though? No. And part of the reason why is because the reality on the ground is that the individuals who end up detained there are not simply permanently going to remain there. We've seen individuals, I've had somebody knock at our door because someone was taken from out of state, they were taken from another state, brought to Nevada, placed at Henderson Detention Center, and within 24 hours, by the time, before we could even file anything, they were moved to Arizona, then they were transferred 24 hours later to Louisiana, then they were sent to a third country that they're not even a citizen of for deportation. The speed by which they move and violate these rights becomes important. So while I would say that those are two good steps, the reason why we asked for more from state legislators and from our state government is because they were capable of doing more. We want higher levels of expectation because we want to live in a state where people feel protected. Nobody should have to wonder where their parent is or where their spouse is because someone with a mask showed up and threw them in a vehicle. That is disgrace and beyond the standards we should have in Nevada.
Yeah, you mentioned wanting more. A couple things that immigrant advocates wanted was, Athar mentioned no ICE on school campuses, but they also asked for daycares, hospitals, places of worship, and those did not make it through the special session. I want to ask too, kind of how do you balance like protecting people, but also not creating unwarranted fear? You don't want to stop people from going to the doctor, going to the grocery store, dropping their kids off at school, taking them to school at all. So kind of, if you guys could all take this, like, how do you balance that here in Nevada?
Try. I think that is very hard because actually there are a lot of fears. And as I said, I've had students come to me, Latino students only, afraid, usually not for themselves, usually for their parents or for their grandparents or someone in their family. And the thing is, the risks are real. So there's a level of fear that is justified. At the same time, we often see that what pops up in the news will make someone afraid of the wrong thing. For example, when they lifted the policy on sensitive locations about arresting people at hospitals or at religious institutions, that made people, I heard from pastors who said people aren't coming to church on Sunday. They're still less likely to arrest people at church than they are arresting a landscaper at a landscaping job because they fit a stereotype of undocumented immigrant. And people can't stop going to work. So sometimes people's fears would take away from them something like going to church, which might have been what allowed them to stay sane. And that's very important. I want to send a message, though, I think for people like myself, who are not at particular risk of ICE, but who want to support, because there's an aspect of this that is psychological warfare, because it's dehumanizing, making people not know where they are safe. We all need a place where we are safe and where we can be normal, where we can put our feet up and be ourselves. And one of the, I think, a very powerful form of resistance is to just talk to an immigrant like a person and not always make it about ICE. There was this boy, you probably saw the one with the hat from Minneapolis who was flown to Texas and then they had to fly him back. There were a lot of photos taken of him, and my favorite was one on his return flight from Texas to Minneapolis when he was brought up front on the plane to sit with the pilot. And what I love about that is it was just childhood. And what that pilot was doing was very powerful, which he was saying, I'm just going to treat the kid as a kid. And that is, right now, I have to say with this government, is a means of defiance.
Thank you.
I'll say I get asked that question a lot. The three questions I get asked the most are, how do you respond to people who are fearful? How do you maintain your energy? And how do you have such nice facial hair? So I'm going to answer the first one right now. And the question with respect to fear is a really important one because a lot of people are, in fact, afraid. The people most likely to be afraid right now are the people who are most impacted by these policies. The rest of folks will look on oftentimes with disgust as to what's happening and trying to figure out the ways they can help. But the fear emanates from those that are directly impacted by these issues. And I'll have that question from a lot of my mentees, a lot of clients, and I'll let them know that that notion of fear is actually a historical experience that many of us have faced. On my end, when I was in high school, I was in high school when 9/11 happened. And we went from being a group as Muslim Americans that were unknown to very much hated overnight. I remember checking the voicemail on the phone at my mosque, and I don't know why they sent me to do it, but they did. And as I was taking the messages, it was one threat after another. Threats to kill everybody in the building, to commit arson, to rape the women that were there. And it was one phone call after another phone call after another phone call. And I looked to government leaders at that time as a high school student thinking that they were going to speak on my behalf, come and protect me. And that call never came. That support never came. It's in those moments when you look yourself in the mirror and you recognize that you're there to save yourself. You're there to save your family. You're there to help your community members that are in need. And you'll find support from others in the community. But the two reactions to fear are fight or flight. And for most of us who are in this for the long haul, because this is a question of our existence, flight will never be an option. So we will always fight, and I'm always encouraged by those that continue to do it. One great example of this, from my vantage point, is the students who have chosen to walk out of school because they said not in our country. And there are some that will threaten those students. There are some that will say they just need to go to class. And those are the same people that are complicit in the harms to what's happening to these students' families and to the future of America. So I'm immensely proud of these students, and in fact, we've made this position very public. If students are subject to improper and unlawful discipline or threatened by any government institution, including any school board or any school administrator, you'll have a visit from the nice-spirited looking gentleman.
Edelweiss.
Yes, and if I may add, we just don't see the fear coming from undocumented communities. But in our experience, we've seen that fear with legal permanent residents, because last year we've seen a surge of increasing application for applying for naturalization. And the way that we ensure that our community is safe is by providing information that come from legitimate sources and working with organizations that host events such as Know Your Rights event. We distribute Know Your Rights cards in different languages. So language is one of the big pieces here, making sure that our community understands those Know Your Rights and at the same time provide materials that are in language. And we continue to serve the community and ensuring that safety is really the main issue, and ensuring that they are safe and they are confident in still applying. And when we conduct those monthly citizenship clinics, is that we have legal attorneys that provide legal review and guidance on how to go about their application should they have any history that will affect their application. So that's how at ACDC we help and serve our communities by providing those languages and having the staff needed to serve and provide, again, those services.
Thank you. And Cristian?
So it is a fine balance. I find myself kind of going through it every day. So kind of echoing what Elizabeth said that, being prepared, I think that's one of the best things to do because it kind of takes away some of the stress that's related to it. Because what will happen if I get detained? What will happen if I get deported? So I always try to have like a plan in place just so that way I know that if this were to happen, then there's still like option A, option B, option C. So I think that's one of the best ways. The other thing is kind of like what Professor Kagan mentioned, just treat them like humans. We're human. Just because, let's just be clear. The only reason that immigrants are being treated differently is because they don't have that paper that says you're a citizen or that you have the legal status. We're still human. We all have rights. So kind of echoing with, being treated as a human, I have DACA, so that means that I'm not completely undocumented, but I also don't have legal status. DACA is not a status. It's just a permission to, as long as the government lets me, stay in the country. And that's only for like a certain amount of time. So the way I see it is that I might be in a better position compared to undocumented folks, but I'm also in kind of like, the best allegory will be a bird cage, right? You're a bird in a cage, you see the other birds flying around, and you want to fly, but you're limited by the cage itself. So the act of defiance, the act that says I'm human, I'm still here, is to try to be just like the other birds, but at the same time being aware of what those limitations are. That's why when I was invited to the forum, I jumped right away. And whenever I step on an airplane, I have to think, am I gonna get detained when I go through TSA? So seeing that and taking this opportunity to just live my life, I think that's the best defiance and the best way to recognize I'm human and I'm not gonna let the fact that I don't have a certain piece of paper define me.
I really appreciate our panelists for just sharing your own personal stories too, and so thanks for being open and honest with us. I want to start with kind of a loaded last question, but do you believe in open borders?
I can go first. I'm happy to, and I'm happy to talk about it. The concept of open borders is somewhat a misnomer, but we have shifted into an international economy. Now, I think part of the reason why you can't have a fully open border is because you also have to account for the services you're going to ration to people, right? That becomes part of what we have to do as a society. We have to understand the full gravitas of what's happening there. But the reality is those that say that they want tougher positions here because immigrants, especially folks who are undocumented or taking something, are actually engaging in another fallacy, which is they're critiquing DEI as an initiative while they're saying they're unable to compete with people who are undocumented. If you are truly someone who believes in American exceptionalism and that Americans can compete with anywhere, why the hell can't you compete with someone who's undocumented?
So I don't think that anything should depend on where I was born or who my parents were. I think that that's unacceptable discrimination. That's not merit. I think that one of the problems we have is that our immigration debate, if that's word, has been reduced, if not to just racism, to just a binary of open or closed. And that goes for Democrats too. I think the Biden administration couldn't find their way out of that box. And what we need is an orderly system. I think what a lot of the public reacted to negatively during the Biden years was not actually openness, it was what was perceived as chaos and lack of control. So I think that an orderly system is fine. We are in a tourist economy, right? We don't want chaotic airports, we want orderly airports, but we want a lot of people going through them. And I think that the immigration system can be like that as well. I'm the beneficiary of that. At the time that my family came to this country, they came through Ellis Island. Ellis Island was a port of entry. I guess it probably would have been a chaotic scene, but it was a government-controlled entry point. And there's no reason in American history that we can't have that. And actually, historically speaking, countries that have been more open to immigration have turned out to be stronger economically, militarily, because they profit from those that other countries discard. And that's the path we should be on, but it's not the one we're on right now.
Cristian or Edelweiss, and if our nonprofits aren't quite able to answer that question, that's okay too.
Well,
sorry. Yeah.
I mean, technically speaking, I mean, kind of that question kind of brings me back to when I was in my undergrad in my political science class, where I remember reading, I don't remember if it was reading it or if the professor mentioned it, but it was pretty much, damn be the person that said, this is mine. Because that's what started the definition of what, where we started to, instead of being collective, to just be individual and, this is mine, not yours kind of situation. So I think I see like the concept of borders being the same way, in that we're claiming to have control over a certain area, but at the end of the day, again, there's only one race, the human race. So why are we making this arbitrary definitions and preventing people from moving freely, from regardless of from the west side of the country, or I mean from the west side of the world to the north side of the world? Like, why are we making those distinctions? Like, it's one world, one earth. Everybody should have equal access to it. We're all human. We should have the equal access and not be having these arbitrary lines that define not only us, but like define and have that situation where you have us against them, which is how we come to what we're currently experiencing right now, where you have the mentality of us versus them, and now we're demonizing them because they're not within our arbitrary defined borders. So in that way, yes, I'm for open borders.
Thank you. We're right on time, so I just want to give you all kind of any brief final thoughts. How do we follow the work you're doing, and how do you kind of continue this path forward during such a tough time right now? Let's go down the line. We'll start actually with Cristian this time, and we'll go this way.
I like to say use the 3 T's, either time, talent, or treasure. I think that right now, as we can see, like not only with the nonprofits, but like all the other organizations that are advocating and fighting to protect our rights and make sure that immigrants are being heard. I think that the best way to do or help out is to use one of the three T's. If you have time, volunteer. If you have talent, use your talent to help out whether the organization or to help out the community. Or if you don't have either of them, if you have treasure, you can always provide or donate your funds.
Mm-hmm. All right, so our community is very diverse. So we have different cultures, we have different languages. So start by listening to the communities so that you will better understand where everybody's coming from, what they need, and with that, you'll be able to support what they need, whether it's from basic needs or any resources that they need, in different languages. So in that way, you'd be able to help them progress toward a better future and have a better contribution also in our economy. And again, support the different organizations, like Attorney Cristian said. It's like donate to organization that provides those free programs and services so that we could continually provide services. And also, if you are able to help raise funds to continue with the programs, please do so. Again, thank you very much.
I'd agree, but mine's far less diplomatic. Start arguing with people who are making misnomers and misrepresentations about what's happening, and stop trying to accommodate them. Push back every single step of the way. Sometimes folks will ask, how do we stop the hopelessness that's there? The way that you stop the hopelessness is you don't allow it to consume you. If you're going to look at society as a bystander and watch society devolve and pass you by, things are problematic. If you host a house party and you get 20 of your friends together and say, hey, we need to have a speaker come out and talk about the ways that we can get involved and continue to push back, we'll be there. And some of you have done that, and we're immensely grateful for that. You shouldn't just do that for us. Do that for every single organization that's out there. You may not be aligned with the ACLU on a variety of issues, which is why I'm saying do it with whoever you need to. But we cannot live in a society where we have one universe of people taking away individuals' rights and another universe that stays quiet. The only way that society will continue to push back against this is through the power of the people, as we've seen in Minneapolis. And ask yourself, for those that have been resisting, that may feel a sense of hopelessness, what would society look like right now if you didn't resist? And how bad would things actually be for this country right now if all of us were not using our voice to protect those that don't have a voice in this moment?
Yeah, I think while there are very important reasons to be fearful, and as we said, that some people have to, that they have no choice, they're in the crosshairs, have to be very, very worried. And while I think we all actually should be very worried about the fate of our country and whether my children will live in a democracy, it is something I worry about. But their point of worry is to motivate, and not to say, oh, well, it's over, I guess fascism is here. That has been a mistake. As almost an equal mistake to those who just said, oh, well, fascism is here, I better capitulate to it. And both of those are errors. We can turn this back. This has happened before in our country and in other countries, and we can turn it back. It is true that it is painful, and there are people who are lost along the way, and that should not happen. But we also have to keep our eyes on the victories. As we know, in cases that we work on together, we get people out of detention, right? The protests in the street are changing people's opinion. The administration doesn't want to talk about mass deportation anymore. I'm old enough to remember when they put it on placards at our national political convention. So this is not over yet, and we can win this. And we can not just push back the terrible things that are happening, but actually build something much better. But it will require actual engagement with it, not running away from hard conversation. So I'm really glad that we can have meetings like this and have more.
I just want to give another shout out to our panelists. All four traveled from Las Vegas to be here in Carson City with us tonight, so thank you.